morning, everybody. In 2 Kings chapter 6, it tells the story of how the king of Syria went to war against Israel, and he consulted his advisors who said, invade at such and such a place. But the prophet Elisha sent a message to the king of Israel saying, make sure you don't pass through this place because Syria is invading there. So a message was sent to the place the prophet had pointed out, warning it to be on its guard. And this happened on several occasions. Well, obviously, this frustrated the king of Syria. So he summoned his advisors and he said, one of you must be a traitor and he's helping the king of Israel. But one of his advisors said, no, my king, it's the prophet Elisha who lives in Israel. He keeps telling the king of Israel the things that you say in your bedroom. So the king ordered, find out where he is and I can send men to capture him. When the king heard he was in Dothan, he sent horses and chariots along with a good-sized army who arrived during the night and surrounded the city. Now, when Elisha's servant rose the next morning to attend to his duties, he went outside and he saw an army surrounding the city with horses and chariots, and he was scared stiff, and he said to Elisha, oh, my master, what will we do? Well, 2 Kings chapter 6 verse 16 says this, and Elisha answered, fear not, for they that be with us are more than they that be with them. And Elisha prayed and he said, Lord, I pray you, open his eyes that he may see. And the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw, and behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire round about Elisha. Can you imagine that? The mountain was full of these supernatural horses and chariots of fire round about Elisha. And Elisha could see them. It's no wonder Elisha said, fear not. Have you ever read this scripture from Psalm 34 verse 7? The angel of the Lord encamps round about them that fear him and delivers them. Whenever I had problems as a young girl, I used to ring my pastor for counsel, and he'd say, can you hear me? Put the phone very close to your ear because I have a word from the Lord for you. And I'd press the phone right into my ear because I didn't want to miss anything. Sometimes he'd speak in tongues and give an interpretation, but mostly he'd whisper these words so that I had to put the phone really close. The angel of the Lord encamps round about them that fear him and delivers them. And I knew that God would help me no matter what I was going through. But it all depended on me having the right attitude. God won't open our spiritual eyes unless we've learned to live by his rules. You know, Jesus came to fulfill the moral law, the 10 Commandments. Paul makes the point over and over again that the law is good and righteous. It's sin that's the problem, not the law. The law condemns us, but it's us who need to change, not the law. When asked which is the first commandment of all, Jesus had a ready answer. Matthew 22 verse 37. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like unto it. You shall love your neighbour as yourself. On these 2 commandments hang all the law and the prophets. Love fulfills the law. So, if love fulfills the law, then sin is just a lack of love. Law breaking is a lack of love. He that loves another has fulfilled the law. When I was 19, I was already losing track of the number of times I'd been fired. The first couple of weeks of every job I'd had were always exciting. There were new faces and new challenges to meet. Because of people's natural curiosity, there was always lots of opportunity to witness, which I found truly fulfilling. My problems usually arose when someone in a senior position told me to do something which I felt was outside my job description, and I'd automatically think that they were trying to get at me in some way. I felt duty-bound not to let them get away with this state of affairs and would righteously refuse to be put on. Well, obviously, my behaviour wasn't tolerated, and with some snide remark like, I thought you were a Christian, or So that's what Christianity is. I'd be fired and shown the door. I couldn't carry on living like this. I had an apartment to maintain, bills to pay, and needed the security of a steady income. God led me to an advert for the SOS Temporary Services Bureau, who promised to pay excellent rates for clerical staff. So I called in at the bureau and was accepted as an audio typist. In many of the firms I worked, I was asked to stay permanently, but even though I knew this meant security where sickness and holiday benefits were concerned, I never trusted that I'd be able to cope with authority. So I opted to remain on the bureau. Then one week I was asked to go to an insurance company. I'd never worked in a typing pool before, so this was novel. I was seated in what looked like a classroom filled with desks bearing typewriters and dictaphone machines. All the desks faced forward except the one at the head of the room where the supervisor sat. Each typist was expected to churn out 60 letters a day, and if that quota wasn't met, she had to stay behind until she completed her quota. Most of the girls found that the work was grueling and hated working there. But I actually found this quota a great challenge, and each day I'd have races with myself to see if I could beat my previous day's record. I never failed to meet the quota, and some days was able to churn out over 100 letters, as I looked on my time there as a great opportunity to work on both my speed and accuracy. The boss was pleased with me and often requested that I became a permanent member of his staff. But that female supervisor was continually looking for ways to get at me. As being a temp, I received higher wages and far more attention than she did. If I'd been a permanent member of staff, this situation would have really got to me. But every time I felt this anger rise, I'd continually tell myself that I didn't work for this insurance company. I worked for the bureau, and they'd probably place me somewhere else next week anyway. I'm constantly amazed at the way this job offered me the opportunity to brainwash myself with this type of thinking. For what seemed like an eternity, the bureau rang me each Friday asking me to stay with this insurance company for another week, as the job I'd been covering wasn't yet filled. And each Friday I'd consent, thinking that this would probably be the last week I'd be here. But my altered mentality meant I was untouched by all this supervisor's provocation. And because I wasn't so sensitive, I could actually understand her feelings. Throughout the whole 9 months that the bureau kept me at this company, I was able to maintain my Christian witness purely because of my change of attitude. It stopped me from feeling touchy and defensive. Never before had I felt so free or held down a job for so long. And it was then that I changed my thinking and started telling myself, hey, you don't work for the bureau, you work for God. Well, at the age of 30, after a number of years working for the church on a voluntary basis, I once again found it necessary to job hunt. I wrote off for interviews enclosing my CV and must have made a tremendous impression, as not one of the firms I wrote to invited me to attend an interview. So I resorted to plan B and registered with the bureau again. Found it really amusing to be given an assignment at one of the firms I'd written to for an interview and been refused. AMEC Properties was a big construction company who was setting up a new branch in Manchester, so we're looking for staff. Whilst they were interviewing people, temporary aid was sought and I was brought in as a girl Friday, which meant that I mucked in and did everything from running errands to the sandwich shop at lunchtime to taking shorthand notes in board meetings. I attacked every new challenge with gusto and enthusiasm, and I thoroughly enjoyed the variety. And it wasn't long before the manager asked if I'd stay on as a permanent member of staff. Recruitments to the firm meant that jobs began to be more defined, and to my surprise, I found I'd been promoted to the top secretarial position, second only to the manager's secretary, who'd worked at another branch and been brought in with her boss to establish this new company. At first, she'd been very jovial and friendly with me, but maybe because she was an older woman, it appeared to me now that she began to see me as a threat, and made life really difficult for me. The company wasn't yet established and refurbishment was still going on in the offices, which meant that until the work was completed, we had to work together in a very limited area. Brenda, she was the manager's secretary, never bothered to hide her feelings towards me, and she did her best to belittle and embarrass me. I didn't have it in me to retaliate. I enjoyed my job and certainly didn't want to make an enemy of Brenda. But in her eyes, my attitude of sweetness and innocence was seen as cunning and deceit. During one particular period, she managed to get almost the whole firm to send me to Coventry. If people wanted to speak to me, they left curt little notes on my desk. They'd talk and laugh with each other, but would totally ignore me. I can't tell you how awful the experience was. And often in prayer, I was reduced to tears, begging God to sort out this situation. Well, on one of our typically British, cold, wet, horrible days, it was obvious to me that Brenda was in pain. Months before, she'd noticed a little clicking noise in her knee. She'd gone to the doctors to have it examined. The click hadn't caused her any pain. It had just been an annoyance which she wanted to get rid of. Well, after much probing and examination, she ended up going to hospital for an operation on her knee, which resulted in her being on crutches, unable to walk, and in constant pain. I felt really sorry for her, as I knew she wasn't putting the agony on. The weather outside was terrible. It was throwing it down, and I knew that she'd have a 10-minute walk at least to pick up her car from the car park. She wasn't talking to me. She'd sent me to Coventry, but the pain on her face made me ask her if she'd like me to fetch her car to the front door. My question astonished her, and it took a minute before she could reply. When she said, "Yes, please, if you don't mind," I could see that her eyes had filled up with tears. I told her I understood the pain she was in because I'd once suffered myself with rheumatism before God had healed me. I took her keys and I braved the weather to get the car. She gratefully got in and she said a genuine thank you before she drove off home. Well, that night, I couldn't get Brenda out of my mind, and I decided to take a little peace offering in the next morning. Before she arrived, I placed a little gift on her desk with a little flower on top. And as she started to open it, I told her that I'd felt so sorry for her the previous day, and this little gift was meant to cheer her up. Softness spread over her face, and she was genuinely pleased that I'd bothered. Over the next few days, she really tried to be nice, but those deep-rooted feelings she had for me hadn't gone away, and it wasn't long before we were back to normal. This woman's attitude towards me was so bad that my boss decided to do something about it. And he physically removed me from this general office and put my desk in his own office so that I could have the protection of him and be away from that cold, chilly environment. This, of course, made Brenda worse. For my desk to be moved to the boss's office was totally unethical, and it made all the women on the staff incredibly jealous of the favouritism I was being shown. But she was no longer able to affect me. God had seen my heart and was working for me. But it was only when my inward attitude towards those persecuting me changed that God was able to deliver me. Fear the Lord, honour the Lord. Don't allow the name of God or Jesus to be blasphemed because of your touchy, self-pitying behaviour. There's more at stake than your feelings. And there's a wonderful promise for those who make living for God their priority. Psalm 34 verse 7. The angel of the Lord encamps round about them that fear him and delivers them. It's true. God does it every single time. God bless you.